Welcome to Life Stories, where we bring you tales of resilience, love, and second chances. Today's story takes us to San Juan Island, where a fractured family finds their way back to each other after 2 decades of pain and regret. Through heartbreak and healing, this story explores the transformative power of forgiveness, the strength of family bonds, and the courage it takes to rebuild what was once lost. Join us as we unravel a journey filled with deep emotions, life lessons, and the hope of new beginnings. Don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories to begin today's journey. Amora Weston stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her gown for the corporate gala that evening. Her reflection showed a woman of poise and grace, but the deep ache in her chest told another story. The dress, a sleek midnight blue, was chosen by Cyrus, her husband, who once had an eye for what suited her best. Tonight, however, she doubted he would even notice. She ran her fingers through her hair, sighing as her mind wandered back to the early days of their marriage, a time when their love had been effortless, built on dreams and shared ambition. Cyrus Hayes had been her partner in everything, her confidant, her cheerleader, her lover. Together, they had built Hayes Technologies from scratch, their late nights filled with brainstorming sessions and whispered promises of a future where they would always have each other, no matter how successful they became. But success had a way of shifting priorities. And over time, Amora felt Cyrus slipping away. His warmth gave way to cold pragmatism, his affection replaced by the sharp edge of ambition. He no longer looked at her with the tenderness that had once made her feel like the center of his universe. At the gala that evening, Amora watched Cyrus from across the room, his confident smile lighting up conversations with board members and investors. Beside him stood Vivian Carter, his assistant, who had a way of lingering just a second too long when she laughed at his jokes or touched his arm. Amora had tried to dismiss the nagging feeling of betrayal, reasoning that she was imagining things. But Vivian's presence had become impossible to ignore. It wasn't just her proximity to Cyrus, it was the way he responded to her. As if the spark that once ignited their marriage now flickered elsewhere. The room buzzed with energy, the sound of clinking glasses and polite laughter filling the air. Amora stayed on the periphery, her usual confidence faltering under the weight of her emotions. She found herself reflecting on how far they had come, not just as business partners but as a couple. She had once believed their love was invincible, a fortress that no challenge could penetrate. But standing there, surrounded by the glittering facade of success, she realized that the fortress had crumbled. Cyrus no longer saw her the way he once had. And, perhaps most painfully, she was beginning to see herself differently, too. It was later that night, back in their expansive Pacific Heights home, that the walls finally came down. Amora confronted Cyrus, her voice trembling as she asked him outright about Vivian. She needed to hear him deny it, to reassure her that her fears were unfounded. Instead, his hesitation spoke louder than any words. The silence between them was suffocating, the air thick with unspoken truths. When he finally spoke, it was not to defend himself but to offer weak rationalizations that cut her deeper than she thought possible. "You've changed, Amora," he said, his voice laced with frustration. "You've been so focused on your career, the surgeries, and the hospital. You've barely been here." Her heart ached at the words. She had sacrificed so much to support him, to help build the life they now had. And yet, he made it sound as though she was the one who had abandoned their marriage. She wanted to scream, to make him see the irony of his accusation. But all she could muster was a single question: "Do you love her?" Cyrus's face fell, guilt flashing in his eyes. He didn't need to answer. She already knew. The days that followed were a blur of quiet resolve. Amora discovered she was pregnant, a revelation that should have filled her with joy but instead brought a deep sense of urgency. She couldn't raise a child, let alone twins. As she would later find out, in a household where love had been replaced by resentment and mistrust. She knew then that she had to leave. not out of anger or spite, but to protect herself and her unborn children. Her departure was deliberate and dignified. She packed her belongings in silence, choosing only the essentials, and left a note for Cyrus. She didn't want a confrontation, she had no energy left for another argument. Her heart was already broken, and staying would only fracture her further. As she drove away from the house, tears blurred her vision. But she didn't let herself stop. She had made her choice, and she would see it through. Amora settled in Portland, a city far enough from San Francisco to allow her the space she needed to rebuild. She focused on her work as a pediatric surgeon, immersing herself in the lives she could save while preparing for the lives she was about to bring into the world. Her neighbor, Mrs. Chen, became an unexpected source of comfort, offering warm meals and gentle companionship when the weight of single motherhood threatened to overwhelm her. As her pregnancy progressed, Amora found herself dreaming about her future sons. She envisioned their laughter filling the quiet spaces of her new home, their curiosity keeping her on her toes. She imagined the strength they would inherit from her and the intelligence they would undoubtedly gain from their father. Despite her pain, she resolved to give them a life filled with love and stability, a life free from the shadow of betrayal. Cyrus, meanwhile, remained in San Francisco, oblivious to the new life growing within Amora. He buried himself in work, even as his relationship with Vivian unraveled and Hayes Technologies began to falter. The empire they had built together was crumbling, mirroring the collapse of their marriage. But for Cyrus, the realization of what he had truly lost would come much later, after the damage had been done. For Amora, this was only the beginning of her journey, a journey marked by resilience, heartache, and the quiet hope that one day, she and her sons would find the peace they deserved. Amora Weston's life in Portland began with quiet determination. The decision to leave San Francisco and everything it represented had been both a liberation and a loss. She had severed ties with the man she once believed was her soulmate, walked away from a life of privilege, and started anew with little more than her medical expertise and an unshakable resolve to provide for her unborn twins. Every morning as she tied her scrubs and prepared for another grueling shift at Portland General Hospital, she reminded herself why she had made these sacrifices. Her children deserved better. Portland was a far cry from the glamorous world she had left behind. The city was slower paced, its charm found in the lush greenery of Forest Park and the warm hum of local coffee shops rather than the towering glass skyscrapers she once knew. Amora rented a modest home near the hospital, where the sound of rain on the roof became a constant companion. At first, the emptiness of the house was unbearable, the echoes of silence amplifying her loneliness. But as the weeks turned into months, she began to find solace in the small routines of her new life. The twins, whom she later named Kai and River, became her anchor even before their birth. During her routine checkups, she watched their tiny forms on the ultrasound screen, marveling at the way they shifted and kicked. Each heartbeat was a reminder of her purpose, a quiet assurance that she was building a future worth fighting for. She bought books on single motherhood, joined parenting groups, and even indulged in late-night knitting sessions, creating tiny sweaters for her boys. The act of preparing for their arrival was cathartic, a balm to soothe the ache left by her fractured past. Her neighbor, Mrs. Chen, was one of the first to notice Amora's growing belly. A retired schoolteacher with a knack for making people feel at home, Mrs. Chen quickly became a source of comfort. She often appeared on Amora's doorstep with steaming bowls of homemade soup or freshly baked bread, her gentle chatter filling the quiet moments. "You're stronger than you realize," Mrs. Chen would say, her wise eyes sparkling. "Your boys will grow up knowing they have a mother who faced life's storms and never gave up." Amora clung to those words during the more challenging days. Balancing her demanding career as a pediatric surgeon with the physical toll of pregnancy was no small feat. There were nights when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. But she pushed through, knowing she was laying the foundation for a stable life for her sons. The hospital became both her refuge and her battlefield. Her patients, tiny newborns fighting for their lives. Scared parents desperate for answers, reminded her of the fragility and resilience of the human spirit. Meanwhile, back in San Francisco, Cyrus Hayes was unraveling. The fallout from his affair with Vivian Carter was swift and brutal. Vivian's charm wore thin as the cracks in their relationship became impossible to ignore. She left shortly after Hayes Technologies began its decline, taking with her the illusion of excitement that had once lured Cyrus away from Amora. Alone in their once shared penthouse, Cyrus drowned in regret. The company, which had been his pride and joy, faced lawsuits, financial losses, and growing discontent from the board. His once mighty empire was crumbling, and with it, his carefully constructed identity. Cyrus thought often of Amora, though he had no way of contacting her. Her departure had been resolute, leaving no forwarding address. No chance for him to plead his case. He told himself it was for the best, she deserved more than the broken man he had become. But late at night, when the city lights painted his empty penthouse in cold hues, he wondered what might have been if he had chosen differently, if he had been less selfish, if he had simply seen the love he had instead of chasing an illusion. Back in Portland, Amora gave birth to Kai and River on a rainy spring evening. The moment she held them for the first time, all the fear and exhaustion melted away, replaced by a fierce, all-encompassing love. They were tiny, perfect, and utterly hers. In their wide, curious eyes, she saw the beginning of a new chapter, one she vowed would be filled with love, stability, and hope. She whispered promises to them that night as they slept in her arms. She would give them everything she had, and she would never let them feel the absence of a father who had chosen another path. In the years that followed, Amora built a life around her sons. They grew up surrounded by her unwavering support and Mrs. Chen's grandmotherly affection. Kai inherited Amora's calm and analytical nature, while River was brimming with energy and creativity. Together, they were a reflection of everything she had hoped for: bright, compassionate, and full of potential. Even as she watched her boys thrive, there were moments when the past crept in uninvited. She wondered if Cyrus ever thought of them, if he regretted the choices that led to their separation. But Amora pushed those thoughts aside, focusing instead on the life she had built. She had no room for regrets. Her sons were her world, and in their laughter and love, she found the strength to keep moving forward. 19 years later, the house Amora built with her sons had transformed from a quiet refuge into a home bursting with life and ambition. Kai and River were no longer the small boys who once filled her days with mischief and laughter. Kai, now a medical student nearing the completion of his residency, had inherited his mother's steady resolve and intellectual curiosity. His calm demeanor belied the intensity with which he approached his studies, particularly in pediatric neurosurgery, a field that mirrored Amora's own. River, on the other hand, had taken an entirely different path, diving headfirst into the world of business and entrepreneurship. His energy was infectious, his innovative ideas turning heads even in his college years. Their mother's influence was unmistakable. Amora had raised them with a blend of compassion and discipline, instilling in them the importance of integrity and resilience. While they respected her deeply, the twins had inherited her quiet stubbornness, which sometimes led to heated debates around the dinner table. Their conversations often revolved around their future plans. But lately, a new curiosity had begun to take root, a curiosity about their father. The topic had always been a delicate one. Growing up, the twins knew only fragments of the story. Their father, Cyrus Hayes, had been a successful businessman who made choices that ultimately led to the family's separation. Amora never spoke of him with anger, only sadness, emphasizing that her focus was on giving them the best life she could. But as Kai and River prepared to step into the professional world, questions about their heritage and the man they had never known began to surface. It was River who found the first clue. While researching potential employers, he stumbled across Hayes Technologies. The name triggered something, a faint recollection of a conversation he'd overheard years ago. Intrigued, he dug deeper, uncovering articles about the company's rise and fall. The story painted a picture of a man who had once been a titan of industry but was now little more than a cautionary tale. River couldn't help but wonder if that man, now living in the shadows of his former empire, had ever thought about the family he'd left behind. Kai, initially reluctant to reopen old wounds, eventually agreed to join River in piecing together the story. They spent late nights sifting through public records, corporate filings, and news articles. What they found was both illuminating and sobering. Their father's downfall had been as dramatic as his rise, marked by personal scandals and professional failures. Yet, through it all, there was a sense of loss and regret in the way Cyrus spoke in rare interviews. It was clear he had paid a heavy price for his choices. When they finally approached their mother with what they had learned, Amora's reaction was measured. She listened carefully as they presented their findings, her expression unreadable. When they were finished, she took a deep breath, her gaze softening as she looked at her sons. "I always knew this day would come," she said quietly. "You deserve to know the full story." Over the next few days, Amora shared the truth about her relationship with Cyrus, the pain of his betrayal, and her decision to leave for the sake of her unborn children. Her voice never wavered, even when recounting the most difficult moments. For Kai and River, it was a revelation not just about their father but about their mother's strength. They had always known she was resilient, but hearing the details of her journey gave them a newfound appreciation for the sacrifices she had made. The decision to reach out to Cyrus came not from anger or curiosity, but from a place of closure. River, ever the strategist, was the first to suggest it. "We can't step into the future without understanding our past," he argued. Kai, though more hesitant, eventually agreed. Together, they convinced Amora that it was time to confront the man who had been absent from their lives for so long. Amora's call to Cyrus came late one evening, her voice steady despite the weight of 2 decades of silence. For Cyrus, the sound of her voice was like hearing a ghost. He had resigned himself to never seeing her or the family he had lost. But this unexpected contact shook him to his core. When she explained the reason for her call, that there was a medical situation involving their sons that required his attention, he agreed to meet, though his mind swirled with questions and fears. As the day of the meeting approached, all 3 of them, Amora, Kai, and River, felt the weight of what was to come. For the twins, it was a chance to meet the man whose absence had shaped their lives. For Amora, it was an opportunity to find closure and perhaps a path to forgiveness. And for Cyrus, it was a chance to confront his past and the family he had long believed was lost to him. None of them knew what to expect, but they all understood one thing: this meeting would change everything. The day of the reunion dawned gray and quiet, the kind of overcast Seattle morning that seemed to mirror the emotions bubbling beneath the surface. Amora, Kai, and River sat together in the small waiting room of Seattle General Hospital. The walls were painted in soothing tones, but the air was thick with anticipation. It had been 2 decades since Amora had last seen Cyrus, and she couldn't help but wonder if time had softened the sharp edges of his personality, or if he would still be the man who had shattered her trust so completely. Kai tapped a steady rhythm on his knee, a nervous habit he'd had since childhood. River, ever the one to break tension, glanced at his brother. "If you keep that up, you'll bore a hole in your leg," he said with a smirk. Kai rolled his eyes but stopped. Amora smiled faintly at their exchange, grateful for the momentary levity. It reminded her of how much her sons had grown, not just in age but in character. Their unique blend of compassion and strength gave her the courage to face the uncertain hours ahead. The sound of footsteps approaching drew their attention. Cyrus appeared in the doorway, his presence both familiar and foreign. He looked older, grayer, the lines on his face carved deep by years of regret and loss. His suit, though impeccably tailored, couldn't hide the slight stoop in his shoulders. A physical manifestation of the weight he had carried for so long. He froze for a moment when he saw them, his eyes locking on Amora's. Time seemed to stand still as a flood of unspoken words passed between them. Then his gaze shifted to the two young men standing by her side. The resemblance was undeniable, the sharp jawline, the determined eyes. He saw himself in them. But he also saw something more, a reflection of Amora's resilience and wisdom. "Amora," Cyrus said, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you for coming." She inclined her head, her expression carefully composed. "This is Kai," she said, gesturing to her eldest. "And River." Cyrus's throat worked as he swallowed hard. "It's good to meet you," he managed, though the words felt painfully inadequate. River stepped forward, his hand extended. "Good to meet you too," he said, his tone polite but reserved. Kai followed suit, offering a nod rather than a handshake. For a few moments, they stood in an awkward silence, the gravity of the moment rendering words insufficient. Finally, Amora gestured to the seating area. "Why don't we sit?" she suggested, her voice steady. Cyrus sat across from them, his hands resting on his knees. He glanced between his sons, taking in every detail, the way Kai sat with measured composure, the spark of curiosity in River's expression. It was overwhelming to see them, to realize how much of their lives he had missed. "I don't know where to begin," Cyrus admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Kai, ever the pragmatist, spoke first. "Maybe start with why you're here." Cyrus nodded, grateful for the direction. "Amora said there was a medical issue," he began. "Something about a genetic marker." River leaned forward. "It's from your side of the family," he explained. "Apparently, it affects how certain medications are metabolized. I had a reaction during a routine screening." Cyrus's face fell. "If I had known," he stopped, the words catching in his throat. "I should have warned you." I didn't know." River's expression softened slightly. "We know," he said. "That's why we're here, to figure out what comes next." Amora watched the exchange, her heart aching at the tentative steps being taken toward a connection. This was what she had hoped for, not a perfect reconciliation, but an honest beginning. For the next hour, they shared fragments of their lives. Cyrus listened as Kai spoke about his medical career, his passion for pediatric neurosurgery shining through. River described his work in business, his voice tinged with the ambition that had once driven his father. Amora filled in the gaps, sharing stories of their childhood and the challenges they had overcome together. As the conversation unfolded, the tension in the room began to ease. Cyrus's regret was palpable, but so was his determination to make amends. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said at one point, his voice breaking. "But if there's any way I can be part of your lives, I'll do whatever it takes." Kai and River exchanged a glance, their unspoken communication as seamless as always. Then River spoke, his tone measured. "We're willing to try," he said, "but it's going to take time." Cyrus nodded, his eyes glistening. "Time is all I ask for." As they prepared to leave, Amora found herself lingering for a moment, her gaze meeting Cyrus's once more. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for raising them into the men they are." She nodded, her expression softening. "It wasn't just me. They had to choose the kind of men they wanted to be. And they chose well." As the family stepped out into the crisp Seattle air, a sense of cautious hope hung between them. The road ahead would be long, but for the first time in years, it felt like they were moving toward something worth fighting for. As the rain-drenched streets of Seattle gave way to the golden lights of a cozy restaurant, the Lauron family prepared to meet for their first meal together. The reserved seating at a waterfront bistro offered a serene view of the Puget Sound, its calm waters a stark contrast to the stormy emotions within each family member. Cyrus had insisted on hosting this dinner, eager to bridge the chasm of 2 decades. The bistro's warm interior was filled with soft jazz and the comforting hum of quiet conversations. Amora and the twins arrived together. Kai and River both impeccably dressed, carrying themselves with quiet confidence. Amora's elegance was understated but striking, her poise evident as they entered the room. Cyrus was already there, standing awkwardly by the table, his polished demeanor faltering as they approached. "Thank you for coming," he said earnestly, his voice carrying a vulnerability that was unfamiliar but genuine. Kai was the first to respond, offering a small nod. It seemed like the right step. The family settled into their seats, the silence initially heavy with unspoken thoughts. Cyrus glanced at his sons, trying to connect the dots between the stories Amora had shared and the young men sitting before him. River had a spark of curiosity in his eyes, tempered by the weight of skepticism. Kai, ever the observer, wore a more guarded expression, his posture straight and deliberate. "I wanted to say," Cyrus began, his hands clasped tightly, "that I don't take this opportunity for granted. I know it can't be easy for you to be here." "It isn't," Kai admitted, his voice even. "But it's necessary." River leaned back slightly, his gaze steady. "We're not here to rehash the past. We're here to see if there's something worth building." Cyrus swallowed hard, their directness catching him off guard. He nodded. "I understand. And I'm here to listen, to answer your questions, whatever they might be." The waiter arrived to take their orders, and for a brief moment, the focus shifted to menus and small talk. As they sipped their drinks, the conversation tentatively began to flow. River led the charge, asking questions about Lauron Technologies and its current state. "I read the quarterly reports," River said, his tone neutral but probing. "The company's decline seems to have been tied to some questionable decisions in the past." Cyrus didn't flinch, though the words stung. "You're right," he admitted. "My choices prioritized immediate gains over sustainable growth. I thought I was invincible, but I was wrong." River tilted his head, intrigued. "And now, what's your plan for the company?" Cyrus leaned forward, his tone more resolute. "I'm stepping back, letting others lead. My focus is on repairing what I can and creating something meaningful for the future." Kai, who had been quiet, finally spoke. "That's a start. But repairing the company isn't the same as repairing relationships." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Cyrus looked at his eldest son, his expression pained but earnest. "I know. That's why I'm here. Kai, I want to earn your trust, not demand it." Amora watched the exchange with a mix of pride and quiet sorrow. Her sons were navigating this delicate moment with maturity, but the echoes of the past were still present in their guarded responses. She decided to steer the conversation toward lighter ground, asking Cyrus about his childhood. He shared stories of summers spent on a small family farm, tales that brought rare smiles to the twins' faces. Cyrus noticed how they leaned into the conversation, their initial wariness softening ever so slightly. "I didn't know we had a family farm," River said, his curiosity piqued. "There's a lot you don't know about your roots." Cyrus replied gently, "But I'd like to share it all with you if you're open to it." By the time dessert arrived, the atmosphere had shifted. The tentative walls of formality had begun to crack, replaced by moments of genuine connection. Kai shared an anecdote from his residency that had Cyrus laughing, while River debated business strategy with his father, their dynamic unexpectedly fluid. As they prepared to leave, Cyrus turned to Amora. "Thank you," he said softly, "for giving me this chance." She held his gaze, her expression unreadable but not unkind. "It's not about me, Cyrus. It's about them." In the parking lot, as the rain drizzled softly, Cyrus watched his family drive away, the warmth of the evening lingering. It wasn't a perfect reunion, but it was a start, a fragile foundation upon which they could begin to rebuild. For the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of hope. The possibility of redemption within reach. The weeks following that first family dinner were marked by cautious steps forward. Cyrus, determined to honor the opportunity he'd been given, threw himself into meeting Amora's conditions for reconciliation. Therapy sessions became a cornerstone of their efforts, providing a space where wounds could be acknowledged, emotions could be aired, and long-buried pain could be unearthed without fear of judgment. Dr. Elena Martinez, the family therapist, was a calm and steady guide through the stormy waters of their history. During their first group session, she encouraged everyone to share their perspectives openly, beginning with the most difficult question, "Why now?" Amora spoke first, her voice measured but tinged with emotion. "Because they're adults now. They deserve to understand where they came from and make their own choices about what kind of relationship they want with their father." River nodded, adding, "And because we're ready to confront it. We've spent our lives wondering about the missing pieces of our story. It's time to fill in the gaps." Cyrus listened intently, his throat tight as his sons shared their experiences of growing up without him. Kai spoke of moments he wished he'd had a father's guidance, learning to shave, navigating medical school, understanding the intricacies of life's challenges. River, ever the pragmatist, admitted that while he admired his mother's resilience, there had always been a quiet yearning for the presence of someone who could have shared the burden. "I can't change the past," Cyrus said finally, his voice steady but full of regret. "But I can be here now. I can show you that I'm not the man I was." The sessions weren't always easy. Some brought heated discussions, tears, and moments of silence that stretched uncomfortably. But slowly, the barriers began to crack. The twins started to ask Cyrus questions, not just about his past mistakes but about his dreams, his regrets, and the lessons he'd learned in the years they were apart. One evening, as they sat around the coffee table in Amora's home, the conversation turned to the Lauron family foundation, one of the conditions Amora had set for their reconciliation. "It's not just about giving back," she explained. "It's about creating something meaningful. Something that reflects the lessons we've all learned." River, whose sharp business acumen had already earned him a reputation as a rising star, jumped in with ideas for ethical entrepreneurship programs. "We could focus on supporting single parents who want to start their own businesses," he suggested. "Provide grants, mentorship, and access to resources." Kai added his own thoughts, his passion for medicine shining through. "And we can establish clinics for single-parent families, offering not just medical care but mental health support, too. We've seen how important that is." Cyrus listened with pride, his gaze moving between his sons as they built on each other's ideas. "This foundation," he said quietly, "will be the legacy I wish I'd started building years ago. You're giving me a chance to do things right this time." The planning sessions became a weekly ritual, drawing them closer together as they worked toward a shared goal. Each member of the family brought something unique to the table. Amora's experience as a surgeon and her understanding of community health initiatives provided a solid foundation. Kai's medical knowledge and innovative ideas added depth. River's business strategies were sharp and forward-thinking, ensuring the foundation's programs would be sustainable. Cyrus, for his part, used his connections and influence to secure funding and partnerships. His humility in these discussions, seeking input, valuing collaboration, was a stark contrast to the man he had once been. Amora couldn't help but notice the change, though she remained cautious about opening her heart too quickly. As the months passed, the Lauron family found themselves not only planning a foundation but also discovering new facets of each other. Cyrus learned of River's entrepreneurial spirit and Kai's deep compassion for his patients. The twins, in turn, began to see their father not as the distant figure they'd imagined but as a man humbled by his mistakes and striving to make amends. Amora observed these interactions with a mixture of pride and guarded hope. She had raised her sons to be strong, independent, and kind, and now, she saw how they were using those qualities to forge connections with the man who had once been a source of pain. The first tangible milestone came when the Lauron Family Foundation was officially launched. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Cyrus stood alongside Amora and the twins, the four of them presenting a united front. The event was a quiet triumph, not only for what it represented to the world but for what it symbolized to them: a step toward healing, a step toward the future. For Cyrus, it was a moment of profound gratitude. For Amora, it was proof that redemption was possible. And for Kai and River, it was a beginning, the first chapter of a new story they were writing together as a family. As autumn turned to winter, the Lauron family continued to grow closer, their weekly dinners and foundation planning sessions becoming a cherished routine. For Amora, watching her sons interact with Cyrus was a delicate dance of emotions: pride, hope, and a cautious optimism that the bridges they were building might truly endure. Cyrus, for his part, was relentless in his efforts to mend the past. He attended every therapy session with an open heart, took Amora's conditions seriously, and remained steadfast in his commitment to being present for his family. The Cyrus Lauron of old, once consumed by ambition and ego, was now a man who understood the value of humility and connection. He often stayed late after dinner, talking with Kai about his medical residency or reviewing business strategies with River, absorbing every detail of their lives that he had missed. One evening, as snow began to blanket Seattle in soft white, River proposed a new idea. "Why don't we spend Christmas together?" he suggested, his voice carrying a hint of nervousness. "I mean, really together. Not just a dinner, but the whole holiday." Kai immediately supported the idea, but their eyes turned to Amora, who held the final say. For her, the holidays were a time of quiet reflection, often spent revisiting old traditions she had created with her boys to fill the void left by Cyrus's absence. The thought of sharing those sacred moments with him now was daunting. After a long pause, she nodded. "If we're going to truly move forward as a family, this is a good step." The decision was made, and plans began to take shape. The family agreed to gather at the Lauron summer house on San Juan Island, a place rich with memories for Cyrus and Amora. The twins had never been there, but they listened intently as their parents shared stories of summers spent watching sunsets over the water and winters huddled by the fire. Preparations for the holiday became a family affair. Amora coordinated the menu, ensuring there were dishes everyone would love, while Kai and River debated the perfect gifts for each other. Cyrus, in a moment of quiet vulnerability, shared a tradition he hoped to revive, decorating the tree with ornaments that had belonged to his late mother. When the day finally arrived, the summer house was a vision of warmth and light. A towering Christmas tree stood in the center of the great room, its branches adorned with shimmering ornaments and garlands. The scent of pine mixed with the aroma of baking cookies, and the crackling fireplace added to the cozy ambience. Amora watched from the kitchen as Kai and River worked side by side with Cyrus to hang the last of the ornaments. Their laughter filled the room, a sound she had once feared she'd never hear in his presence. It was a moment of profound realization, despite the pain of the past. They were here, together, creating something new. Dinner was a feast of flavors and stories. The twins shared childhood memories that made Cyrus laugh and cry in equal measure, while Amora recounted the many ways they had grown into the remarkable young men they were now. Marcus Chen and his wife, Elena, joined the celebration, bringing with them the warmth of lifelong friendship. Later that evening, as snow fell softly outside, Cyrus pulled Amora aside. "I never thought I'd see this," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "Our family, together like this." Amora studied him for a moment, seeing not just the man who had broken her heart but the one who was working tirelessly to earn a second chance. "Neither did I," she said softly, "but I'm glad we're here." That night, as they sat by the fire with cups of hot cocoa, Cyrus watched his family with a heart full of gratitude. For the first time in years, he felt truly at peace, knowing that while their journey was far from over, They were on the path to something extraordinary. The days after Christmas on San Juan Island brought a sense of tranquility that seemed to mirror the healing within the Lauron family. Snow lay thick on the grounds, muffling the world outside, while inside the summer house, life bustled with warmth. The family spent their days cooking, playing board games, and sharing stories that bridged the gaps of time. It was during one of these quiet mornings that Cyrus approached Amora with an unexpected question. "Amora," he began, his voice tentative, "do you think we could talk? Just the two of us?" Amora, seated by the bay window with a book in hand, looked up at him. His expression was a mix of vulnerability and hope, and she found herself nodding. Of course. They walked outside, the crisp winter air biting their cheeks. The sun glinted off the snow, turning the island into a wonderland of light and shadow. Cyrus led her toward a bench that overlooked the water, where they had once shared so many dreams in their youth. The familiarity of the place was both comforting and bittersweet. "I've been thinking about us," Cyrus said after a long pause. "About everything we've been through and where we are now. I know I can't undo the past. But, Amora, I want to build something new with you. Not to erase what happened, but to honor it and grow from it." Amora studied him, searching his face for the sincerity she had longed for in the years before their marriage fell apart. She saw a man transformed, not the ambitious, unyielding Cyrus Lauron of 2 decades ago, but someone who had learned the value of patience, humility, and love. "I've seen how much you've changed," she admitted, "and I've felt it. But Cyrus, this isn't just about us. It's about Kai and River too. They've just started to trust you, to feel safe with you in their lives. I don't want to risk anything that might unsettle them." Cyrus nodded, understanding. "I know. And I would never want to jeopardize that. But I also know that we're better together. We always have been. Maybe it's time we start thinking about what that could look like now." They sat in silence for a while, the gentle lapping of waves filling the space between them. Amora's mind swirled with memories of their love, the good, the bad, and everything in between. She thought of their sons, how far they had come as a family, and the possibility of creating a new foundation. "Maybe," she said at last, her voice thoughtful, "we could try. Slowly. Step by step." The relief on Cyrus's face was immediate, his eyes bright with gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered. "That's all I could hope for." When they returned to the house, Kai and River greeted them with playful accusations of sneaking off to avoid cleanup duty. Amora laughed, her heart lighter than it had been in years. As the twins teased their father, she caught his eye, and a shared understanding passed between them. They were beginning something new, tentatively, cautiously, but together. The rest of the week on the island passed in a blur of joy and togetherness. On New Year's Eve, the family gathered around the fireplace, sharing their hopes for the coming year. Cyrus spoke last, his voice steady and full of purpose. "I hope this is the year we continue building this family," he said, looking at each of them in turn. "That we strengthen these bonds and cherish every moment we have together. And I hope," he added, glancing at Amora, "that we never stop finding ways to grow." As the clock struck midnight, they toasted to new beginnings. Amora felt a warmth spread through her, a quiet certainty that, no matter what challenges lay ahead, they had the strength to face them. Together, their story, once fractured and painful, was becoming something beautiful. It wasn't a return to the past but a step forward into a future that held the promise of love, redemption, and unshakable family ties. For Amora and Cyrus, it was a new chapter, and one they were determined to write with care. As the snow continued to fall gently on San Juan Island, the Lauron family sat together by the glowing fireplace, their laughter echoing through the warm, cozy home. Cyrus and Amora exchanged a quiet glance, a glance that spoke of forgiveness, resilience, and the courage it took to rebuild a love they thought was lost. Their sons, Kai and River, added to the moment with their lively banter, embodying the legacy of strength, wisdom, and unity their parents had fought to restore. This was not just a story of redemption, it was a testament to the power of family, second chances, and the enduring nature of love. The Laurens had turned their fractured past into a foundation for a brighter future, one built with care and hope. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories for more heartfelt tales of love, resilience, and transformation. Thank you for watching.